we're going to head into our main topic this evening, which is trauma or trauma. And before we move into the presentation, I wanted to say something. You saw my little note in the email, but I want to just say something about the pre-meeting assignment. In the pre-meeting assignment, we had two TED Talks, one TEDx and a TED Med talk. And the TEDx talk, the person presenting, Dr. Riggs, sorry. He used language that was heterosexist, heteronormative, homophobic, and sexist in the course of his presentation, and so I just have to apologize. I was compartmentalizing when I saw that and did not think about, this presentation and how it might strike people. It really, what he said and how he said it is not reflective of our values in Restorative Arlington. And so I want you all to know that. If anybody wants to have further conversation about this with me, please let me know. Najla and Susan and I have talked about it, and we're gonna be sending out a resource sheet later, and we're gonna come up with some different videos that convey the information about the brain part and trauma without that other offensive stuff. So my apologies for that. Hoping that won't get in the way of us hearing Najla and the wonderful content that she has to bring to us. So with that, I want to note that Najla Mangoush is a certified trauma awareness practitioner. She presents the STAR training, Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, and has a lot to share with us about trauma. And so I'm going to let her go ahead. I'm going to also note that Susan Hirsch is with us. She worked with Najla on this presentation. She's a faculty member at George Mason University, also a member of our planning team, and she teaches about justice issues at George Mason. So we have a lot of local talent tonight with us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Najla. To note that we'll have a break at about 7:25 for 10 minutes. So hopefully you'll be able to settle in and spend time hearing from Najla. Okay, go ahead, Najla.
Thank you, Leanne.
Oh, I'm so sorry. One thing I want to note is we're going to have questions at the end of the presentation, Q&A. However, if there's something that is burning that you need Najla to explain or something right away, please put that in the chat. Normally we're staying away from chat, but if you have a question, I'm going to be monitoring the chat if you need something answered right away. Otherwise, please hold those out of the chat until the end of the presentation. Thanks. Go ahead, Najla.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to walk through the trauma awareness today with you tonight. It's a big topic, and also it's a sensitive topic. So just as a clarification, if you don't feel comfortable for any point or you feel overwhelmed, feel free to leave the PowerPoint or do something else and come back. And the other thing I want to clarify that I'm not speaking about trauma from medical perspective or neuroscience perspective. I'm talking about trauma as from social science perspective, and from also how to create more healthy communities as also RJ practitioner, and how to be trauma informed when it comes to working with others who witness the situation of violence. Me and Professor Hirsch, faculty member in George Mason University, we work together in developing these slides, and we try actually adapt a lot of information and a lot of resources from STAR program that I'm going to explain later. So trauma is the elephant in the room, right? It's obvious, it's complex, and no one wants to talk about it most of the time. We feel uncomfortable and we feel uncertain about our own pain or experiences because of many reasons that we may also discover later. But that's why trauma in many situations and culture, they don't use the word trauma because they don't feel comfortable of talking about their own experiences. So why we need to talk about trauma? And I think, we are in situation and time where is violence actually, in the subtitles everywhere, either in the United States and other countries, has been for a long time. We just witnessed all these civil wars, the conflict, violence, poverty, injustice that really escalate a lot of violence, and that violence actually also affect our communities and societies in many ways. So most of the time we don't make that link clear between trauma and violence. We witness the violence, we deal with it in our own, but we didn't really realize sometimes that there is a huge link between the two. And these connections are often misunderstood or ignored. And in order really to understand those linkage, that's why trauma awareness is important, because we're gonna explore more in the model, snail model later, how that really connected and how that really, important to acknowledge when it comes to acknowledging trauma, but also healing trauma. Going very quickly to the main themes in the agenda: trauma as a call of change and transformation, defining trauma, the causes and the types of trauma, common response to traumatic events, the intersection between restorative justice and trauma, and also what is the cycle of violence and what's the cycle of resilience and how we can break through. This is again just to indicate that really trauma is affected to all these different themes that we see in this picture. So I think everyone here with this picture. And, in the wake of September 11, many organizations and religious leaders from different backgrounds and civil society and more than 38 development organizations with the Center of Justice and Peace Building and Eastern Mennonite University came together with the grassroots level to think about how we can react to this tragic event or this traumatic event. And one of the ways they interact to this specific tragedy, it was the program called STAR. But also I will stop here and say that trauma actually also could be tragic and could be very painful. But on the other hand, it could be also a way of opportunity and growth and transformation if we understood it and deal with it, and we learn the skills and tools to handle that healing process. Also, other notice that this actually event, it's a traumatic event, but when we think about it, it actually affects people differently. So people, for example, who have been lived in New York City or in those towers, the loss and the pain actually completely different from people they were witnessing that from the TV, from people they're witnessing that from the TV, but in other country. So this tragic, it actually affects people differently based on their situation and their relation to that specific event. So back to STAR program, because I'm using most of their materials as a certified trainer, and I'm giving credit to their information that I'm sharing with you tonight. Elena Zook and Carolyn Yoder both are considered the co-founder of the STAR program, which is called Strategic of Trauma Awareness and Healing. You can just find it online. They have wonderful program there. They have level 1 and 2, where they teach STAR, which is called Trauma Awareness. When you learn a lot of tool, a lot of information, very deep conversation about trauma. Each course, it has like between 7 to 10 days and very intensive in many ways. But in the end of the day, if you would love to deepen more dive, you can go and have the certificate and become certified trainer where we finish specific training with different organizations or communities. And this is what I did. Carolyn Yoder, actually the co-author of Trauma Healing, one of the books that I shared in the resources, considered a very good book, very easy to read, but have a lot of foundational information about trauma. She said, when traumatic events happened, we stand at a crossroad, and that's right. Elena, she trained me personally, and she's my mentor when it comes to trauma healing. She has been a practitioner and trainer since 2002, and she also has international experience in many places around the world. So what is trauma? When we Google trauma, there is a lot of definitions about trauma, and there is a lot of misconceptions about trauma. But I think the way that I understand trauma is that, you know, traumatic wounds are typically defined as a cut, you know, as a wound that actually not affect the skin itself or damage the skin, but also in many ways underlying the tissues of that skin. And when we get accident or we get cut, the first thing we do, we just go to the doctor or we try to take care of that wound. We try to take care of that cut. And then this is the way that I think it's really speak to the experience of trauma. It's really described as a situation where we have that emotional pain and distressing, and we feel overwhelmed, and we lost the ability to cope and leave people more powerless. And also this is one of the beautiful definitions come from the Center of Nonviolence and Social Justice. So traumatic events, actually, they are, you know, extraordinary in a way because they overwhelm the way that we act in our daily life. And in many ways, we don't feel it because we trained in societies where we're not, you know, we ignore our pain because we are busy with this and this and that. But when we think about it, it's really something very deep emotionally that really affect the way that we think about ourselves and others. Other thing is very important to talk here when it comes to the concepts and when it comes to the definitions. It's very important to distinguish between stress and trauma. Stress is a frequently used word as outside force or event that influences the body, mind, and emotions. Stress is a natural part of life and can be neutral, can be positive, can you know, push people to be more creative and more responsible, or could be negative as well. And at certain levels, stress can energize and motivate to be protective and creative. But when it comes to too much stress, then that could lead to anxiety and distress. Whereas the trauma is more of wound, it's more of injury from experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event that is highly upsetting or horrifying, or a series of traumatic events that you feel the lack of control and powerlessness or the threat of injury or death. So it's really more about what's going on here in our soul, in our body, in our brain, and how we can really understand the way that we feel and we interact in that specific experiences. Whereas the stress is everything, you know, it's every day, it's, you know, in every situation, it's like normal thing that we just have some pressure, we have just some obligation that we need to navigate, whereas trauma is a wound. And this is the best way to come. And trauma actually also is a Greek word. It comes from Greek definitions word called trauma, and it means wound in the Greek language. So traumatic events occur when our ability to respond to threat is overwhelmed. And this is also back to speak to the same definition that we explained earlier. Other also thing that we need to, you know, think about that there is difference actually between PTSD and the trauma that we are experiencing today and we are trying to talk about. PTSD most of the time is a medical condition, diagnosed and generally by professional or by mental health caregivers. And here the way that we think there is some differences between what we talk about today and PTSD is that the PTSD actually, its diagnosis is generally used for distress reaction that do not go away within 30 days, but this is not the only distinguish between both, but this is one of the indicators. Also, PTSD affects individuals' ability to function socially, in the workplace, with family. So also the dysfunction could be also one of the indicators of PTSD. But not everyone, this is the thing that it's very important to acknowledge, that not everyone who is exposed to a traumatic event will develop PTSD. So here is the danger sometimes when we talk about it or when we describe situation, we just easily put the definition of PTSD without thinking if there is differences when it comes to the regular trauma that people witness or PTSD. Yet they might still experience very serious effects. So PTSD often requires medical diagnosis, intervention, and assistance. Where trauma on its own, it could be healed through a lot of skills and a lot of awareness and information that may help the healing journey. Types of trauma. So when we talk about trauma, we define trauma as emotional wound, but also there is different types of trauma. We have individual trauma, when trauma affects individuals such as violent assault, discrimination, witnessing death. Collective trauma is when trauma affects large group of people, such as witnessing an event or experiencing a policy shift. So both types can be single event, could happen once in your life, or could be ongoing or continuous or cumulative trauma, which we're going to explore on the other side. So one of the famous types of trauma, ongoing trauma, like civil war, for example, or poverty, or climate change, where specific country or community they experience. Historical trauma, it's cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan, across generation, and also in the situation of massive group trauma, like a genocide, displacement from land, all these different experiences. Cultural trauma affects when attempts are made as a part of culture or people who are try to create dignity violation or harm to some of the cultural group. That could be also, there is a lot of examples around cultural trauma. Structurally induced trauma is very important one. Policies that result in injustice, abusive, racist, or unsafe system. All these systems actually structurally has the injustice as one of the themes that build on that system, which actually will induce over the time. Every single time they interact with public or interact with societies, they have this, one of the indicators of injustice that include with that policies. And this is also a big thing that we can talk forever about. Secondary trauma, it comes with people. You are many professionals, you are listening to this PowerPoint tonight. You have been even working with traumatized students, working with communities traumatized, working with victims, working with offenders, working with people they suffer from trauma. And we need to be really aware that we as a caregiver, as a peace builder, as a professional, we may also can carry this secondary trauma by working with others. And if we are not aware of that, we need to take care of ourselves, because that will affect our ability to adapt ourselves and to continue work in our field. Participation-induced trauma also is a very important one. This is actually people who traumatize others under the name of duty. And this is also a big one. It's back to the law enforcement, back to the military, back to the intelligence, back to a lot of people that they are in situation that they need to make their own duty. However, they're actually harming others under the name of their duty. So, the effects of trauma, again, it's obvious in this drawers that really, the beauty of this picture, I like it because it shows that human being is all connected. The brain, the body, and the soul is connected to each other. And what really think sometimes it's something really tiny could not affect us, will affect us in many ways. Physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Understanding that effect is very important. And one of those symptoms could be insecurity, loss of cultural identity, racism, or extreme nationalism. All these symptoms actually could be as effect of trauma. I love this quotation because pain that is not transformed can be transmitted. And that's really right when you think about it in many situations and cases and examples and story. If we are not aware about our pain as a society, as an individual, and we're not taking care of it, it could be in some point transmitted. So I think here it's very important to know, okay, we learned about trauma, you define trauma, you saw those type of trauma, but why actually we need to know that? I mean, is there a point by knowing this? Yes, there is point because trauma creates needs. You know, when we are harmed, when we are struggling, when we are overwhelmed, we have different, you know, very important needs that we need to be aware of. The most urgent need of trauma or survivor is usually safety and security. This is a big, big, big thing. If we don't feel secure and safe, it's so hard for those traumatized or survivor to reconnect with others. Traumatic situations often leave survivors feeling that they have been victimized and treated unjustly. So people who have been traumatized need to know and understand what happened to them. They often desire information and chance to tell their stories, and we're going to discover that later in in other slides. But really, this is important to think about, and I encourage every one of you to think about this in your in your own experience, in your workplace, working with communities, witnessing somebody experience a trauma. How those needs are very important, and it's very significant to acknowledge them in order to work and to be aware about the needs of trauma. Back again, the thing is, a lot of neuroscience, a lot of studies about how really our brain reacts when in situation of trauma. And this is really, really important to acknowledge that our brain is very smart and is very capable to handle trauma. This is the good news. However, if we didn't know how it reacts in situations of threat or trauma, it will make us confused most of the time and maybe unable to understand our situation. So as you see in the picture, we have the cerebral cortex. This is the logic brain, where it comes to thinking, and planning, our rational thinking, all these good stuff we do as higher brain, as a professional, and people, we do our work. Then we have the limbic system, which is called also the emotional brain, where also we have the memory storage, we have emotions, including the amygdala, which is activated by fear as first response. Then we have the brainstem, which control automatic reaction, including the fight, flight, freeze response. And this also, the brainstem, they don't understand that we need to go through a linear process because for them is everything happening now and we need to react now. So when we think about those different pieces of our brain, it makes sense to understand, like, normally when we are not under threat, normally we are in safe situation, we act from our cerebral cortex or from our rational brain. But when we are under threat or we under a lot of risk or trauma, actually the amygdala take the lead and try to react in a different way that completely different from the way that normally we interact. And this is good because it helps us to to get rid of the chemicals that come out in the situation of fear or threat. However, it's not good to let the amygdala to lead for a long time, because that could lead to a risky situation or to risky consequences. And I will explain that later on the other slides where it will be more obvious. So in crisis, information goes directly to the amygdala and register as a fear, right? So for example, imagine you are in a car accident and you're just driving, and then you had that big accident. The first thing comes to your mind, oh my God, I'm in this car, and you cannot even think about the information. You cannot think about the logic behind this accident. All what you think about, oh, you're under threat, you are fear. So the limbic system triggers the release of stress, of chemical stress or hormones. This activates actually the fight or the flight response in the brainstem and puts the body in a state of hyperarousal in order to save our lives. The cycle completes, we feel a sense of relief. So for example, if we are in a situation in car accident and maybe the car could be exploded any time, the first thing we're gonna do, just gonna run away from the car, or maybe in some situation, we fight with the person that he was the reason behind this accident in the other car. Or we might go in different situation where we'll be in a freeze situation. And that freeze situation also have complexity, because if it takes so long to be in that position, that indicator that you need to really discharge the trauma from your own body. So the freeze is a tense trauma energy becomes trapped in the nervous system. If this energy not discharged or integrated within a few days or weeks, the construction can produce a trauma reaction later. And I will explain something could make sense when we go through the slides. So the fight, flight, freeze, it's important to understand they are normal reaction when we experience traumatic event, affect the brain and the way that have been structured. This is when the amygdala take the lead. So this is normal, this is okay. However, how we can handle this, how we can ground ourselves, this is also important information that we need to know. So after a traumatic accident, for example, we use every single day when we talk, someone get, angry or get really emotionally, really sensitive, we say, just pull yourself together or pulling yourself together. But that's not easy, right? Because if we don't understand the way that our brain is function and our body responds to those traumatic events, it will be so hard for us to understand how we do that and how we can pull ourselves together. So depending on how much attention is paid to trauma healing, the effects of the trauma, my linear and limbic system and the brainstem. Or we may be doing all right until we bump up against something that is similar to what we as present during the original event. We may not go through this freeze, flight or fly or freeze, and we seems okay, but then something pops up. We smell the same, thing that we smelled in that specific accident, or we have been touched by someone, in a way that remind us about previous experience, or maybe we see something or we hear something. All that could maybe be triggered that actually stored in our memory, or similar emotions as a feeling of loss of control or shame. That called triggers, and triggers are normal and consider one of the symptoms of trauma. But we need to know why we need to deal with them and how we can deal with them in order to think about the recovery or the healing. So suddenly, instantly, emotional brain or the limbic system or the brainstem take over. A lot of energy is present, can feel like we are right back in the traumatic events again. This is what's called flashbacks, or we may just experience a sense of depression or anxiety. And allow me here to share with you a personal story just to explain how triggers are really crucial and is considered one of significant component when it comes to trauma. Just a brief introduction to my background. I'm Libyan. I'm trained in criminal law in Libya. And during the Libyan Revolution 2011, before I moved to the US, I was, the revolution started as a response to the dictatorship of Gaddafi regime after many years of dictatorship. And the revolution started from the court building. And I was with many others, Libyans who protest in the street asking for more justice and more freedom and accountability. During that time, there is a lot of friendship have been created, and there is a lot of people I met. One of them was the co-founder of the national TV that have initiated after the revolution called Libyan Ahrar. This guy, his name is Muhammad. We worked together, for almost a year and a half. I knew him, I know his life, he knew me. One of the days in March 18, 2012, during the revolution, Gaddafi decided to send tanks to my home city, Benghazi, where I live and my family live. During that day, most of the international TV and journalists decided to leave the city because of the danger, right? He decided actually to kill everyone in the city that day. And me and my family, we decided to stay home. And many people as well. During that day, Muhammad decided, so Al Jazeera International asked if any of the locals can take the lead and record that significant event. And Muhammad was one of them. And he said, I will do that. So Muhammad used the equipment of Al Jazeera International, and he was following the tanks and recording what's happening. And during that, he gets assassinated, and he have been, targeted by snipers, and he died immediately. Well, the same day in the night, I received a phone call from one of my friends, and he told me about Muhammad's death. I just listened to the news. I just received the news without any reaction. Next day, thankfully, we are alive, and the tank, plan failed because a lot of people, they decided to, fight against that. It's a long story. However, after 2 or 3 days, I just went back working in the court, working with my friends 24 hours from 9 a.m. sometimes to 12 p.m., just working without stop. In 2013, I get accepted to do my Fulbright, and I came here to the United States. I did my master in conflict analysis and conflict transformation in Eastern Mennonite University. I learned about STAR, and then in 2015, the school decided to make a show. This show called Arab Spring. That show actually, they invited me and say, hey, you need to come, you're from Libya and we are presenting about Libya and other countries. I say, yeah, sure. And then I went to that theater play, and that theater play was this kind of theater. It's very intense, a lot of pictures, a lot of, sounds, and it's very expression in a way that they use a lot of, this intense symbols that really try to send message. Anyways, I was sitting with one of my friends, with my mentor, Eileen, the one that you saw her picture, and was witnessing that. I was watching that, that play. So they start with Egypt because the first country, and then they start with Tunisia, and then they start with Libya. And when the way they do it, they choose symbol from each country. And when it comes to Libya, they use Muhammad, my friend, as a symbol of the Libyan revolution. And soon I just saw the person who tried to be Muhammad, and I saw his picture and the intense music. I just start feeling the blood just, all my body is just shaking. And I felt my blood pressure, it's just getting high and high and high and high. And then I felt, my heartbeat was getting faster and faster and faster. And then I couldn't stay in the theater. And then I just decided to go outside the theater. And then I just started running for almost a mile and a half. And the people who know me, I can't run even just for 2 minutes. So that's, for me, was a big thing. I was like running like a horse. Even my friend and my mentor, they couldn't follow me. And then I just, after a mile and a half, I just fell down on the floor and start crying and shaking for almost an hour. Next day, I had a meeting with my with my mentor, Eileen, and we talked about it. And she said, oh my God, Najla, it took you 3 years. It took you 3 years to process your pain. And what happens yesterday, it was a trigger because you wasn't able to express your grief and your sadness about your friend. You didn't get a chance to talk about it. You didn't cry. You didn't express your emotions. And this is how is it. Your body is smarter than you. They kept it for a while, but now there is a moment where you need to deal with it, and it comes in the situation of the trigger. So triggers is a real. And I'm hoping by sharing this story that just to see that stories and experiences affect us differently. And if we didn't get the chance to process them in a healthy way, they may affect us in different ways. It could be now, could be later, could be after a while. We define trauma, types of trauma, how trauma affects our bodies and brain, and the importance of acknowledging that triggers and flashbacks is a normal reaction to trauma. And we heard about the story and how speak to the triggers and the flashback perspective. Now we're gonna talk about what it's called snail model. And snail model is one of the models that have been implemented and used by STAR program. Snail model is very powerful in a way. It makes it easy for you to visualize and to see the cycles of trauma and to understand the thing that I need to clarify here, that all the symptoms that you see in the circle, that's not necessarily anybody have been experiencing trauma, you're gonna experience the same, or all of them. Again, we need to think all the time, trauma affects us differently, affect individuals, societies, and communities differently. Sometimes the same specific event could affect us differently because we come from different background, different perspective, different faith system, different way of how we grow up in our family, in our society. All that create who we are. So the way that we respond to the trauma, it could be different from one person to other, from communities to other. However, those symptoms considered as something comprehensive that most of the researchers in this model agreed that they're gonna experience 2 or 3 of them in general in different situations and experiences. So talking about here, cycle of violence. When traumatic events, I encourage you to follow with me in victim cycle when we start acting in and acting out. And again, the word acting in, it doesn't mean we are doing something harmful or something inappropriate. It could be simple stuff. So when traumatic event or acts of violence happen, whatever that situation, death of loved ones, accident, abuse, violence, injustice situation, whatever that situation, I think most of the people, they're gonna experience either anger or rage or my spiritual questions or loss of meaning. That also depends on the level of the trauma, the connection that we have to that specific experience. If it's connected to us directly or connected to someone we love or connected to our community or society. Also, some of the symptoms could be suppression of grief and fear. It could be realization of loss and panic and anxiety. It could be shock, injury, fear. So these things, sometimes people, they start with anger first, and then maybe they feel this psychological changes. So again, the thing about this model, it's really, adjustable based on people, experiences or situation. Also, you can feel powerless, helpless, guilt, the shame, also one of the indicators that victims have or people, they experience a trauma. And if we didn't get the chance to acknowledge that, we're gonna reach to the point by re-experiencing and living the same events or the same traumatic thoughts through triggers or flashbacks, or even maybe with other ongoing trauma. When we talk about, sometimes trauma could be signal event and could be ongoing event. So for example, if you deal with injustice situation, if that happens again, then you're gonna re-experience that traumatic event again and again and again. So part of it, in the way that we responded as individuals, it might be silence, might be depression, might be in very extreme situation, even with like high school students, could be suicide, it could be self-abuse, addiction to alcoholism, to drugs, the way that we deal with food, the way that, you know, we deal with some habits in our life. So all these symptoms, when we think about it, in many contexts, in many experiences, actually consider one of the things that we think about when it comes to the situation of acting in. Then if we didn't get the chance, you know, in many situations, if we didn't get the chance to break the cycle of acting in, acknowledging there's something wrong here, we start acting out. I'm not saying everyone have been, you know, experiencing trauma, he will start acting out in the community or the society or the family. But also if we deal with this trauma for a long time and affect our ability, or we get overwhelmed over the time by it in our society, environment, family, it will come to the point where we start acting out. And could be with simple stuff, but at some point could reach to the violence stage. So we start maybe sometimes attacking in the name of self-defense or justice, you know, responding to social and cultural pressure bride, deciding to pursue our own needs by ourselves because the community or the government or the institution incapable to protect us, viewing violence as redeemable, dehumanizing the others. This is very big thing. Dehumanizing the other is one of the big things that policymakers, you know, leaders, societies, they do under the name of protecting themselves by dehumanizing the others. Us versus them, me versus you. And this is actually, if we talk about it, there is a lot of, you know, historical speeches over the decades have been used by many leaders over the years that they use the language of dehumanizing other versus them. And my perspective, this is so dangerous because it's considered one of the reasons behind the civil war, one of the reasons behind injustice in this world, one of the reasons behind the violence. Because when we start to criticize ourselves or put ourselves in category us versus them, we versus them, and try to put the people under specific category or label them, then this is the dangerous will happen and the violence will be escalated. And then experiencing unmet needs for safety and justice and shame and humiliation, what could be also in the way of bullying. Bullying is a big thing. Like most of the people, they have been bullied. They, in some point, if they didn't deal with their own stuff, they may be bullied others, you know, in the future. Also, you know, blaming others. We keep blaming, and repeat the same story, the same narrative. And we feel stuck in it. Criminal activities, domestic violence, child abuse, all these could be symptoms of acting out as a situation of victim. So what I'm trying to say here, one day we may be victim, but if we are not aware about our pain and our you know, struggle, and we didn't get a chance to deal with it in some point, we may start either acting in or acting out. And those snail models, it might take, you know, days just to explain it. The way that we explain it in STAR training, it takes sometimes entire day just explaining those cycle of violence. There is a lot to say here. There is a lot of information, and there is a lot of examples and stories behind it. But as a sake of education today, it's very important just to touch on some of those aspects and understand that violence, actually trauma connected to violence. And even when we violate ourselves, we violate our emotions, we are acting from a place of trauma. The good news that healing is possible. And healing is also, you know, a way to what's called sometimes resilience, right? Resilience, in many ways, researchers explain resilience, the ability to bend, not to break. So the ability to be flexible, the ability to adjust your own pain and learn from it, and learn how to deal with it, and learn how to process it. And it's not easy, it's not one way, and it's up and down, however it's possible. So when we see in the previous slides, the trauma experience victim in, we'll talk about the symptoms. And then if we didn't take care of ourselves, we may start being aggressive. We may start being offender in some point. And if we get the chance to break the cycle, even in acting in stage, or acting out stage, then there is the way and possibility for healing. And this is very important for any one of you here, you're listening to me today, that you're dealing with this situation in your workplace or within your community, to understand that the first need for anyone who have been traumatized, individual, community, society, organizations, schools, students, victims, the sense of finding safety and support. And this is one of the big themes that helps you to break the cycle of violence. Then we can see the resilience or building resilience also is connected to 3 different sections: breaking free, which means finding safety and support; then acknowledgement, where you acknowledge your pain, acknowledge your sorrow, acknowledge your loss and how to deal with it; and then you have the reconnection side, where you try to engage with offenders and society and other things back and end up with the possibility of reconciliation, because we know reconciliation is the ultimate goal. Forgiveness also the ultimate goal. I'm not saying everybody should reconcile or forgive, but however, there's many choices when it comes to the healing cycle. When you're breaking the cycle, when we try to build resilience, there is many options there in that snail model, and we can choose in which point we need to stop and which point we need to go farther in our healing journey, even societies or individuals. And also I will go in details in some of the aspects of it. So talking about breaking free, individuals and groups can address trauma even many years later. And this is also the good news. Some people, when they may say, oh, we have been traumatized since 10 years ago, or like 20 years ago, or this is like generation thing that have been fed over the years, again and again, we have it. No, there is a way to heal. There is a possible way of healing. The good thing about healing, time is matter. Time could be different from me, from you, from this specific family, from this specific community and society. So time is important. When you feel it's the good time for you to start your healing journey, I think this is going to be the best time for you, because you realize, you make the choice, you know it's the good time for you to start thinking about how you can break the cycle of violence within yourself, within individuals, with others that you work with or you live with. Breaking free can happen with in different levels. As we mentioned again, safety is a very important thing. Safety, which considers safety, physical safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety. It can be the mother lab for child. It could be conversation with loved one. It could be a community that are welcoming and trying to engage with that pain and with that trauma. It could be a therapist. It could be someone that you trust. It could be professional, whatever, that sense of safety. But also could be different from situation to other. In disaster, for example, disaster is an example. The first thing people, when they come out of this, natural disaster like hurricane, they're looking for a safe place to stay in. They're looking for shelter. They are looking for food. They are looking for, so we need to be aware about, these first priority are very important to establish this healing journey, to feel safe so you can reconnect and you can ground yourself and you can start thinking about the rest of the needs that you have. Support from community, family, friends, neighbors, body, brain regulation, and we're gonna learn about this in the last slides, but those also is a big component. Leadership, leaders, they can maybe symbol of glory, they can lead communities and entire nations to healing and can lead them to more pain and trauma by choosing what's called trauma. And also this is a big conversation about the importance of leadership in times of trauma. Choice to heal, and I think this is the most important thing. If you didn't choose to heal, then nobody can enforce you to heal. It's your own choice, it's your own time, it's your own decision to go through this, because healing, it's not easy, but also it's possible at the same time. Acknowledgement is a big part of it. So we talk about breaking free, safety, the role of leadership, the choice to heal, the time, the support. Acknowledgement is a big part of healing from trauma or resilience. First step of mourning and grieving. And the difference between both of them, grieving is a sentiment mourning is the way that you express your emotions and your, your sadness or your anger. We grow up in society where we are, we look to the crying and expressing our emotion is something that we don't feel comfortable with. And we don't even get enough time to process this. Crying is very helpful and very important. And we need to really think about mourning and grieving as a very important stage when it comes to healing. Some of the obstacles of mourning, for example, fear of being overwhelmed, inability to face what happened, threat to knowing order, truth that is unknowable, trauma that's ongoing and you cannot still even process your own pain, and ability to carry out usual rituals. In societies, for example, where I'm coming from, people, when they die, they grieve for 3 days. For 3 days, they just provide space for crying, crying, for 3 days, and sometimes could take, even a week. And sometimes we feel, oh, this is too much. But I think providing space to express your emotions and cry without judgment is very healthy, because it helps you to release all these chemicals from your body and come to the realization that how you're going to deal with your own pain. Storytelling is a big component of it, naming what happened, confronting fears, accepting the reality of the loss. And memorializations, also memorials, play a huge role in acknowledging. They could be healthy memorials and they could be very traumatized memorials. And the memorial that you see in this picture, Richmond Slavery Reconciliation Statues, consider one of the good memorials, I think, because first of all, the way that the memorial looked like shows 2 people hugging each other, but also they create one in Richmond, they create one in Liverpool in England, and they create one in Republic of Benin, where those 3 major cities, they have been engaged in the slavery history. And they put that statues as a symbol of recognition to the pain and the damage that have been done over the years, and as a way of thinking forward how we can reconcile and how we can work with this pain and with this shame over the history. Acknowledgement does not mean actually we demonize. It reflects the stage or phase of healing, or either for individuals or groups or communities, that we acknowledge that we are dealing with this, we acknowledge the pain, we acknowledge the loss, and we may do it in a way of rituals, we may do it in memorials, we can do it in poems, we can do it in art. There is different ways to express this acknowledgement. Part of the acknowledgement, as they say, storytelling. Storytelling is very important. I met myself, Michael Lepsley, 2 years ago in New York, and I have been privileged to meet him. He's from New Zealand, and he did a lot of great work in reconciliation in South Africa. He lost his 2 hands because he was working and committed to peace and justice. They've been sent a bump in the mail, and as a result, he lost his 2 hands. He had a very great sense of humor. He's really committed to peace, a lot to learn from his wisdom. One of the things he do in the situation of trauma, he uses storytelling as a method of breaking the cycle toward healing trauma. The way that he uses it, he's trying to reinforce the victims to think about their own story from different perspectives, using some questions like what was done to me, but also what has been done to us, what I did to others, but also what we did to others, and what I failed to do, but also what we failed to do. So they use some tools to encourage victims and also groups and individuals to think about their story from different perspectives. It's not evil versus us. It's more than that. There is 2 sides of the story that we need to acknowledge, that there's 2 sides of the story that we need to be aware of in order to think about our stories in a healing way, instead of repeating the story again and again and again and trying to live in the victimization mode for a long time, which makes the healing so hard. So reconnection, restorative justice, and survivor needs. I love this slides because it's really make the connection obvious between RJ and trauma. That safety and security, information, who, what, how, truth telling, restoring validation, empowerment, acknowledgement, repair, all these things that actually RJ interested in. And the main theme of RJ already actually also important when it comes to trauma healing. That's why RJ should be trauma informed in order to get to the causes and the roots behind the violence, the root behind the harm, to try to use this information in a healthy way and in restoration way. Back also to the question, who has been harmed, what their needs, and the rest of the questions that we learned in the previous workshops. Here is very obviously connection between RJ and trauma. Experience of victimization and trauma involve most situations of harm. Both restorative justice and trauma healing must acknowledge and address the sense of victimization and resulting needs of victims, offenders, and community. Most situations of harm involve question of justice and injustice, and situations of injustice frequently involve restorative justice provides as a framework to address those needs. Why this has happened to me? Why me? Why my community? When this is gonna done? What we gonna do about it? So RJ, by the questions and the values and the principles, he actually set up a framework that helps the victims and the offender actually also, and the communities have been traumatized, to express themselves in a healthy way, using good questions that help them actually to reframe their pain and their victimization experience in a healing journey. Again, story and re-story play a crucial role in trauma recovery and restorative justice. For instance, circle process is one of the tools, but also the method of Michael Lapsley, how to try to frame stories and encourage victims to change the way that they think about themselves, how to change the narrative also. Other methodology is very important when it comes to storytelling. All these components can also lie down in restorative justice and trauma healing. Humiliation and shame is a big component when it comes to restorative justice and trauma healing. Victims, but also offenders, both they feel humiliated and shamed because we are a society where we actually label either the victim to be victim forever or the offender to be offender forever, and that is very dangerous. And in order to deal with the shame and the humiliation, we need to be very sensitive, very careful how we make that the shame and the humiliation something that we don't focus on, how we use language and questions that helps either the offender or the victim to understand that this is specific experience that you went through. However, it's not going to define your life. It's not going to your identity for the rest of your life. And this is also very important when it comes to recovery and resilience. Back to the encounter things, ask and answer questions, express feelings, tell stories, develop understanding, work toward mutuality. All these also, again, opportunities for encounter, even through trauma healing or restorative justice. So why it's important RJ need to be looked through the trauma lens, because meets justice needs, because we said trauma creates needs, and also injustice creates needs. Break the justice as a punishment cycle, that punishment never been the answers, punishment never been the healing choice. Remove or transform shamed, that also again could work through trauma healing, through encouraging the restory method, through restorative justice circle and processes. Also create space to experience empathy. And empathy, it's a big thing in RJ and in restorative justice. And I will say in general, in any work related to peace building or communities or working with others, empathy is a big component when it comes to listening the stories, when it comes to how to be compassionate with others, how to show our support. It's a big thing that we can also contribute in our work. Redirects neural pathways. Most of the time we are gonna stuck in our trauma. It's so hard for us to identify our path. It's so hard for us to understand where we're gonna go, what's the second choice we have to make. So redirecting through professional, through this awareness about trauma and RJ is very important to acknowledge that. I love this. There is no time stamp on trauma. There isn't formula that you can insert yourself into to get from horror to healed. Be patient, take up space, let your journey be the bar. Again, back to the idea of time, back to the idea of choice, back to the idea of support, back of the idea of awareness. There is no one journey, there is no only one path. We already went through the triggers and the flashbacks, but this is just to remember that if you or someone around you is having flashback, what you can do. Okay, we knew about the trigger and the flashbacks. Remember that you are having common trauma reaction, that this is normal, that this is happening for everyone who witnessed trauma. Trauma happens to anyone. Let your body discharge the energy that comes with reaction by going for a walk, doing something you like, exercising, jogging, dancing, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Again, this depends on the level of trauma, right? So I'm not assuming that someone, for example, experiencing death in the family, that he can just go for a walk or dance or whatever. But that could be one of the options when you feel you can do it in order for you to discharge your energy. It might be crying, it might be sobbing, it may be, expressing your feelings. Deep breath, it's something that all the researchers, all the study shows is very important to regulate your body and your brain. Deep breath is very important to regulate your brain. When you're in a situation, your amygdala want to take over, want to take the lead, say, hey, stand by here and just wait for a minute. Let's take a deep breath. Let's take a deep breath to think about it from different perspective. So we make the space for our rational brain to take the lead. Ground yourself in the present by, trying to say, okay, this is smell, this taste, the way that I hear this sound. Oh, okay, this is a flashback. It's not actually a threat for me. This is just flashback from my previous experience. And I know it. It's painful. However, I know it's flashback. Again, if you are, belong to specific faith, prayers, they may be helpful in your situation. If you are somebody else who prefer meditation, yoga, exercising, journaling, drawing, writing, singing, dancing, all these pieces of arts actually help you to go through your own process. Notice what triggered the reaction, so it didn't just come out of blue, right? So this is the importance of knowing that triggers and flashbacks come for a reason. Come because there is something happening here. I need to be aware about it. I need to take care of myself. I need to study more about this. I need to think about this. I need to ask someone, maybe help me with this. So you have different options to deal with your own trigger and flashback. And if it gets intense in a way that you cannot function anymore, really you feel overwhelmed, that it makes your ability to adapt to your own environment so hard and so difficult, I will encourage you at this point to go to professional or to go to someone really know exactly your problem and can help you with other different skills and methodologies. This again, I'm not gonna go through the slides, but this is just to show how emotionally and thinking and behavior and physical and spiritual and societal, there is different way to engage in different ways to take care of yourself. Emotional, allow yourself to experience your grief, crying, shake, breathing deeply, thinking, write something, be patient with yourself, behavior, balance time spent with others, limit demands on time, physical exercise, remember you have choices to heal, spiritual, discuss your belief system with spiritual leader, pray, meditate, practice rituals that make it good for you to feel good about yourself, engage with healthy friendship or with community. In the end, thank you so much for listening and engaging with me. I appreciate your time and being with me in the moment. And thank you so much. This is my contact and Professor Hirsch contact. If you have any further concern, comment, question, feel free to email us after this event. And I'm welcoming now questions if anybody have any question.
Thank you so much, Najla. For questions, you could either unmute yourself and raise your hand, or if you want to put it in the chat, I'm monitoring the chat as well. We don't use the chat that much here, but we can use it for Q&A. So either way, whatever works for you folks who have questions for Najla. I can't see everybody all at once, so I'm trying to scan for anybody who's unmuting, and if you want to just start talking. that'll work.
One of our homework articles was, actually it was a talk, it was Nadine Harris, and she talks about the permanent damage, the observable damage that there is to the brain of a child who undergoes multiple traumas. And so what do we do? How do we heal such damage?
Well, thank you, Catherine. This is a very important question, but also a big question. But, you know, I think in the slide 3, when we talk about the connection and the link between violence and trauma, and just to echo, the TED Talk, it's very good and profound TED Talk, because there is a lot of researchers and studies support that people, when they grow up in communities, they witness a high level of violence, whatever that violence look like. They have more, ability to have what's called toxic stress. And that also has been covered in the TED Talk. Toxic stress actually is a way to explain trauma. We define the difference between stress and trauma, but toxic stress comes where societies or families or communities experience violence or ongoing violence, whatever that violence is, poverty or physical violence or abuse or whatever. And the way I think one of the things to deal with that is to, first of all, acknowledge this. And the second thing I think is, it depends on the level of the damage. If that person, with the support and with the resources and with skills that he can adapt, that we learned through the PowerPoint, he can go through this, that would be perfect. If it's really complicated, then my working with professionals or with medical field, that would be more helpful in their situation. So it depends on the level of the damage or the trauma that they deal with. But definitely support, family support, community support, that is a big component. And also school system need to be aware of this problem.
I just wanted to thank you, Najla, for the amazing presentation, and also for qualifying poverty as a traumatic experience, because for a while that has been debatable. I was trained in ACEs back when I was in Tennessee, and it was really hard to get people to understand the impact that poverty has on the brain and the executive functioning skills of individuals who have lived and persisted in intergenerational poverty. And I know that there are programs out there where they're looking to, as they work with parents and their children, to help rebuild the plasticity and the connections in the brain. So could you speak any more on that? Are you aware of any models that you feel are most effective when really helping to build resilience and, help to undo some of the trauma of ACEs and poverty?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question. Also, it's a very important question. I'm not really familiar with this area so much, to be honest. However, I just, read some research here and there about the link between poverty and trauma. And I think the dangerous about poverty is it's actually something ongoing in your life every single day that you cannot really distinguish yourself from, especially when you are struggling every day with your food, with your, with your housing, with your healthcare, with all these different, important stuff that people, they cannot live without in their daily life. It's actually affect them in a way that they cannot engage in the educational process. And this is one of the things that there is research have been showed that there is students, I think in California, had very bad grades, not because they are not smart, not because they don't study. Actually, they were studying very well, but because they're really overwhelmed with this poverty thing and they live it every single day, the kids, when they go back to the school, they cannot really engage with the teachers and the school system. So I think it's a very important question, and I think there's a lot of things to say there, but I really am not I'm aware about the models that have been used to discharge this trauma from those children.
Thank you.
So Najla, I think we have time for this. I've got a question in the chat now also. You might also see it, but I'll just go ahead and read it. It's actually a two-part question. So in the presentation, you mentioned the acting in and acting out model. This person is wondering if acting in or acting out are required to break the cycle, or if you can skip these and move to the rest of the model without experiencing these steps. And that's one part of the question. And the second part is about the choice to heal being very personal and on the person's timeline. And how can we help someone realize the time to heal so they don't stay in the acting in, acting out phase forever?
Thank you for the question. For the first part, I think it's necessary to go through one of those cycles. Because acting in and acting out basically just about showing that what kind of symptoms that we might witness or experience when we face the situation of trauma. Unless actually we are like, we are not the one that we deal with this trauma and we want to help some other to break the cycle. But if we are experiencing it, or we are working with community experiences or whatever, it's really crucial to go through one of these. And it's not necessarily to experience all those symptoms or all these indicators. However, in order to break the cycle of violence, you should at least witness or experience either acting in or acting out. About the choice and the timing and how we can help someone else, I think the awareness and the education about trauma could be one of the things that help people to decide to heal. I'm talking about myself when I studied a lot of things, and again, my apology, there is a lot of information and there is a lot of wisdom in the STAR program. And STAR program, again, it's one of the models to deal with trauma. There is different models and different schools when they deal about trauma. But from my experience, there is a lot of information that I might not, for the sake of time, I cannot provide it today. But STAR actually have a lot of good pieces and information that helps you, because STAR 1, it's about discovering the symptoms and the definition and the cycles. But STAR 2, how to implement what you learned in your workplace, in your community, in your society. So it gives you the tool for intervention and give you the tool to help you to walk somebody else through the process. And one of it, awareness and education. And that might be also in direct way. And I will give you a small example if I have time, Leanne, very small example. I helped with creating workshop in Syria about trauma. Middle East culture, they are very, they look to the trauma, they really as a, stigma, as something that we should not talk about it at all. And for them, trauma is like you're saying you're crazy. So one of the struggle we were facing is how to name the workshop. It took us forever to decide on the name of the workshop. We end up, naming the workshop, how to create more healthy communities after civil war. It have nothing to do with trauma, right? But when we did the training, when we developed the training, I wasn't one of the trainer, but I helped with the materials. When we developed the trainer, was actually using a lot of examples how violence affects communities and societies. And we talk about it's very important to take care of ourselves. So the way that we frame it, it was really culturally sensitive, so they can accept the information and they know there's something wrong here, but also there is possible to learn from this and adapt those skills. So this could be one of the ways that we can help others to go through trauma if they are not ready or they don't think also they're struggling with their own trauma.
Thank you, Najla. Thank you again so much for your presentation. If you have questions that come up later, whatever, please do relay them to us. You're getting snaps from people, I see, Najla, and applause and all that. We are going to need to, just for the sake of time, jump into our breakout rooms, which we'll just do in a minute. I will be joining the legal breakout room once I'm sure everybody's in the breakout rooms. So legal group, hang in there, take a library moment and start thinking about the answer to the first question on the agenda, the round one question. And I will be joining you shortly. What I was starting to say is if you have other questions, feel free to relay them to me. Part of our reflection in our working groups will also be capturing questions or put them in the evaluation, and we'll be sure to get them to Najla and get some answers to you all. We will also be sending out, excuse me, we will be sending out a resource sheet sometime probably tomorrow, and with more resources on trauma, so you all can explore those on your own.